This is a short lecture pod to explain a few things about Assessment 2, the Transitivity analysis. Lecture pod Series 4 already explains how to do this assessment, as does the Unit Learning Guide, which we'll go over again in a minute. Those of you who've done approaches to text in the last 2 years will already know how to do a basic transitivity analysis, at least the analytical part of it. So let's briefly go over the details in the Unit Learning Guide. So, most important of all, the due date, 16th of January, 5 p.m. The aims of this assignment are to demonstrate your grasp of the structure of English grammar and its role in the process of interpretation, and to demonstrate your grasp of the role of transitivity structures in a literary text. You're going to be provided with a passage from a short story or a short passage from a novel via Views. Now, the assessment can be accessed by the online assessment function. Now, the assessment has two parts, an analytical part and an interpretive part. Let's go over the analytical part first. So, be given a bit of text. Type out that bit of text. Divide the text into clauses. And then, thirdly, conduct a transitivity analysis of each clause by labeling each element of the clause. Let's go over that again. You'll be asked to present your analysis in the following way. First, present the typed out text of this or text segment. Second, present each clause from the text on a separate line. And lastly, present your transitivity analysis by listing the clause constituent after its functional label, as in the example there on screen from Hemingway in your Unit Learning Guide. He put one knee on the fish. Agent there is he, process is put. The affected participant there is the knee, one knee, and the circumstance there is on the fish. Now, there's no word count for this first or analytical part of the assignment because it roughly equates to about 750 words. But there's a strict word count that does apply to part 2 of the assessment, which is like a short essay of 750 words. Part 2 of the instructions. In this second part of the assessment, it's interpretive. So you're going to be asked a question regarding the grammatical structures of the passage identified in part 1. Now the question will concern the general topic of agency and the role it plays in the literary text under discussion. So, the assessment criteria. The application of stylistic concepts to the analysis of the text, the demonstrated skills in the interpretation of the text, write the thing in your own words, very important skill that one, and the fact that your answer meets the minimum standards of writing and presentation. Pretty standard stuff. Now, the question will be made available in the assessment folder. Download the question sheet into Word, write answers to each question, and then upload the Word file to the Turnitin link for Assessment 2. Okay, now let's have a look at that analysis again before finishing with a few words about the interpretive part of the assessment. So back to part 1. Before you can break down the text into clauses and then the clauses, before you can break down clauses into processes and participants, you're going to need to be able to identify the clause. Now, you can do this by looking for the verb. No clause without a verb. But what you're looking for is the main verb, the pivot of the sentence. A verbal group sometimes, and what we call the process. And most of the time, you'll hit the boundary of a clause when you come to a conjunction or punctuation mark. The rest of the time, as I said, you're going to have to look for the main verb, the pivot of the sentence. And if you can reverse the sentence, you'll realize you've hit the pivotal verbs, because sometimes there'll be more verbs than one, and they won't necessarily, the second verb may not necessarily be a part of that process. But generally speaking, as I've said, you'll find the clause boundary when you hit a conjunction or a comma or something, or a full stop. Once you've identified the clause, ask yourself this simple question. Who does what? To whom? With what effect? Who or what does what? To whom or what? With what effect? Okay? Now, in LecturePod Series 4, we applied these questions to a short passage from Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. They're the passages on screen there that we looked at. We didn't look at the ones there in orange. So I propose we're going to have a look at those ones now. So the first thing to do is identify the clause boundaries. And you can do that like this. Okay? You won't have to represent this in your essay, but this is just something I do when I'm cutting up the text. You can do it this way too, it's a way of finding it. But as I said, you won't have to show that bit. You can if you like, but you won't have to show that bit in your analysis. That bit there is what I want you to show in your analysis. The clauses on separate lines. Okay? So they were wedge-shaped strips, and he cut them from next to the back, down, etc., etc., etc. Now, you'll notice there that those conjunctions, and, they aren't part of the analysis, but they're on separate lines, and they're italicized. They're italicized to put them out of the way, okay? And that's the reason why you put them in italics and on a separate line. That second clause, by the way, he cut them from next to the backbone down to the edge of the belly, is actually one clause. I just couldn't fit that on the PowerPoint slide. It's actually one clause, but you'll be able to fit a long clause like that on your Word file. Okay. What's next? Let's have a look. Yeah. You cut and paste that first clause, and you identify the agent, the transitivity elements, the agent, the process, the affected participant, and the circumstance, just the way that I've done there. So the all-important process there, the verb, you'll notice there, go to that one first. I think you'll find it's the easiest way to do it. And then you pull out the participants, the agent and the affected participant from that. Okay, let's look at another one. Got my cues all mixed up here. Here we go. So, he cut them, here's the long one, he cut them from next to the backbone down to the edge of the belly. Okay, the crucial process there is cut. Okay, and the agent, of course, is the old man, he, and the affected participant here, the thing that's being cut, is them. Okay, the fish. Now the circumstances there are long prepositional phrases from next to the backbone down to the edge of the belly. Now there's always room for a little bit of debate about some of this, and some people might include down there as actually part of the process. But don't worry about that. I've got it here as prepositional phrases. Pretty sure I'm right about that. Generally, the circumstances are always either adverbs or prepositional phrases, and that's an easy way to identify them. Okay, another one, simple one. When he cut the strips. Okay, agent is he, the process had cut, okay, not just cut. Affected participant there are the strips, and when would figure there as a circumstance. Let's have a look at another example. Okay, so he spread them out on the wood of the bow. Agent there, he, spread out. I've got it out there as part of the process. Again, there's room for little sort of room for little differences of opinion here, which I'll take into account when I mark your assignments. But I'm pretty sure I'm right about that as well. Spread out as part of the process. Some people might include that in the circumstance. No big deal though. So he spread out. What did he spread out? He spread out them. Where did he spread it out? On the wood of the bow. Okay, whether that's one or two circumstances, it doesn't matter too much. I've got them there as two. Okay, so another example. Wiped his knife on his trousers. Now the agent there is implied. It's not actually specified. It's not on the page. But we know who it is. It's the fisherman. It's the same agent as the last clause. But because it's not in the words on the page, we represent it in the analysis as blank. If you liked, you could actually put square brackets around it and say he or whoever the agent was in the last clause. It's kind of implied. But all you really have to do is do what I've done there. Leave it blank. Just leave it underscore there or leave it blank. Process there is wiped. The affected participant, his knees. The circumstance there, another prepositional phrase, on his trousers, excuse me. Now, let me work out where we are here. Okay, I think the next one is very similar in that what we have is an implied agent, okay? So we know it's he, but leave it the way I've got there, kind of understroke or in square brackets. Lifted, what did he lift? The carcass of the bonito. Circumstance, by the tail, okay? So one thing you might notice here is that nearly all of the processes here are material processes, okay? Cut, had cut, spread, wiped, lifted, dropped. There's only one other kind of process that we've looked at here, and that's the relational process in, I think it is were, in they were wedge-shaped, okay? Now the simple conclusion that you would draw from this is the action-oriented nature of Hemingway's prose. It's very much focused on doing, on the physical character of the natural world and the fisherman's struggle with the raw materials, and with the elements. Yeah. Now, once you've completed this analytical half of the assessment, you move on to the interpretive half of the assessment, part 2. So you'll be given a passage like this one to analyse, but you'll be asked to read that passage inside the largest context of the larger story. It'll probably be a short story. Now, that passage will in some way be representative of that larger story. And just because I've limited the amount of analysis you have to do, doesn't mean you can't go on to make similar observations about other parts of the story. That's really up to you. I've just specified the limits of what you have to do. So you can mention, in other words, you can mention other processes in the story that won't appear in the passage that you've analysed in part 1. Okay, that's up to you. The model for part 2, it's a short essay, okay? It's a 750-word interpretation of a short story. But it's an essay with a difference because it's informed, or the interpretation is informed, by the transitivity analysis that you will have just done. So, what are some of the things you might say about the analysis we've just done? Well, if you look at the processes in the Hemingway passage, nearly all of them, as we've just said, are material processes. And in LecturePod Series 4, we looked at the difference between material and mental processes. Material processes concern actions in the material world, actions that occur out there in reality, as we like to think of it. Mental processes concern inner or the subjective world of cognition, thoughts, feelings, memories, etc. You might notice there that I've used the container metaphor to explain the difference between the outer world of material processes and the inner world of mental processes. But enough of that. So while you don't have to mention this distinction between material and mental processes in the first part of your analysis, it would be a very good idea to make this distinction in the second part of your analysis, even if you don't have anything remarkable to say about it. Chances are, though, that the text you will analyse will have more of one process type than the other. And this will tell you something useful. It might confirm your intuitions about the text that you got on your first or second reading, in which case you will have provided evidence of your critical judgment. And that's really what the whole exercise is about. Now, I'd advise you to read the text several times before doing your transitivity analysis. It will probably be a short story from Dubliners, but it might be something else we've looked at. There may even be scope for a non-literary text. I haven't decided yet. The text will appear in early January when the unit officially opens. Now, you can, of course, mention other things aside from agency and transitivity, but these will be your points of analytical focus. The elements of transitivity we've looked at, or rather another element of transitivity that we've looked after that you might be interested in, is meronymic agency. That's when, if you remember, when part of the body becomes the agent and not the person. So the meronym is a kind of metonym that substitutes a part for the whole, like the hand or the voice for the whole person. So here's another analytical category to look out for that might be relevant. Don't have to do it, but if it's there and you think it's irrelevant to make that point, feel free to do so. And that's a general rule of thumb. Look out for opportunities to apply stylistic categories that you've learnt from these lecture pods. As I said, in this assignment in particular, assignment 2, you won't have to do this. But if the opportunity is there and you see it, do it. It might get you extra marks. If you can make a useful additional point about cohesion, nominalization, when a clause becomes a thing, or collocation, the company that a word keeps, then, as I said, feel free to do so. There'll be more scope to apply the full range of categories that we've looked at in the final essay. Most importantly of all, don't forget to consult your intuition and your literary judgment about the story you're looking at. Remember, stylistics does not replace interpretation. It just provides a good basis for it by giving us lots of evidence about the grammatical construction of the text. And good luck.